Morning, everyone. I'm Nick Burns, professor here at the Kennedy School. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome the Minister of External Affairs of India, Minister Salman Khurshid, to Harvard. We've just had an opportunity over the last hour and a half to host the minister at a breakfast with faculty, senior faculty, and it was a terrific session where the minister gave us his views and India's views on a wide variety of issues. I think all of you know how important the India-U.S. relationship has become. On our side of this relationship, from President Clinton to President George W. Bush and now to President Obama, there's been a fundamental dedication to create a strong strategic partnership, economic, societal, political, military, between our two countries. And we've been very gratified to work with the Congress government of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and to work with Minister Khurshid on this relationship. He has just come from a meeting at the White House on Friday afternoon when President Obama hosted Prime Minister Singh, and of course they have a very close relationship of deep respect, and I would even say, as you said this morning, Minister, affection between our President and the Indian Prime Minister. And Minister Khurshid has also come from the annual meeting of the UN General Assembly, which, as all of you know, is the place to be the second half of September. Every prime minister, foreign minister in the world is there. I know you've had, Minister, a marathon of meetings, including a very important meeting with the Prime Minister and the Pakistani leadership, Mr. Nawaz Sharif. So there's a lot for us to talk about in welcoming you to the Kennedy School. Certainly want to talk to you about India's appreciation of the very difficult environment in which India is living in its own region, with continued problems with Afghanistan, thinking towards the drawdown of NATO troops in 2014. How can India and the United States stabilize together Afghanistan? Thinking about the difficult relationship certainly that the United States has with Pakistan. I know that the complexity in your relationship with Pakistan. And of course, looking east, and India is looking east, both of us have a critical relationship for the next century and beyond with China. And so there's a lot for us to discuss this morning. The minister is accompanied by a very close friend of Harvard University, Ambassador Nirupama Rao, who has been India's magnificent ambassador to the United States. She has been here twice as a student. She has been here twice to speak to us in the last few years. She's been very generous with her time, and I wanted to thank Ambassador Rao for being here this morning. I also wanted to recognize my colleague, Professor Taran Hanna of Harvard Business School, who chairs the South Asia Institute here at Harvard. It is now an institute, and it is our opportunity at Harvard to try to focus on all things South Asia and to unite Harvard Business School, Law School, Harvard College, the Kennedy School, and the other Harvard schools to work together, and under his leadership, we're doing that. A word about the minister for whom you're about to hear. He is a protean man. He's had a very distinguished career in public service. Not only is he Minister of External Affairs, he was previously Minister of Law and Justice. He's had a long career in Indian politics, obviously in the Congress Party. He's someone who's been an educator and a leading advocate of education at all levels in India. He's also an author of many books, and he's a playwright. And so what an example for Harvard students. Someone who can pursue a career in public service and yet be so engaged across many different realms of human activity. It's really a pleasure to welcome him here today. He'll speak to us about India's foreign policy and India's outlook in the world, and then when he finishes, I want to call upon our students and others present to ask him questions and engage in conversation. But please join me in welcoming Minister Khurshid to Harvard today.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm very grateful to Ambassador Burns for his kind words, introduction, and I must say how delighted I am and honored to be here this morning before such a distinguished audience. I do believe that that you're all indeed very, very fortunate to be at an outstanding institution like Harvard University. We have an important bond with Harvard, and many of my colleagues have graduated from here and continue to nurture fond memories of their years here at Harvard, and then of course of the work that we can do together, intellectual pursuit of a relationship, US-India relationship that is a significant relationship in our scheme of things. And as I talk about it today, you will have an idea that some of the things we perhaps take for granted, dimensions of remarkable reach that we take for granted, and often get lost in some passing and transient irritants that arise from time to time in a wholesome society. I think, of course, addressing an audience like yours in this city and university inevitably makes one reflect upon the past, the remarkable historical context in which our relationship has grown, but that perhaps is also unnecessary, because we do understand that what is happening today is both rooted in a fundamental relationship we've had, but at the same time is also a dramatic transformation in recent years because of the untiring efforts of an enormous number of people, but particularly led by visionary leaders in our both countries. Before I actually talk about the implications of that transformation and its practical dimensions, it's just important to keep in mind, we were discussing over the breakfast meeting earlier, is to keep in mind how we see each other as people, how India looks at the United States and its people, led obviously from time to time by perceptions of our leadership on both sides, our concerns in the regions in which we are sometimes preoccupied, and our view of the world. We have often described India's foreign policy as being based in a national consensus, and largely true, a consensus that has survived several changes, dramatic shifts, political shifts and changes of government, but a consensus that actually finds its roots in the national movement, India's independence movement, the remarkable leadership that was given to us, or that gave us that the quality of that movement, and the early years that we were nurtured into a stable democracy by the leadership, the first generation leadership. That consensus sometimes appears to be a bit frayed and a bit frail in recent years because of the extremely loud discourse in Indian politics. But I do believe that the firm foundations of that consensus remain. Largely, the superficial dimensions may have changed from time to time vis-a-vis our relationship, the US-India relationship, but the fundamentals have always remained intact, and those fundamentals are essentially about values that we cherish, about our way that we see ourselves aspiring for a particular quality of life. You describe that as the American dream. We talk about it more in the context of the Indian way of life, the Indian ethos. But there are remarkable similarities, congruence, and today we write upon those foundations a very ambitious plan of connectivity in terms of our strategic thinking and working together in terms of economic opportunities, and most of all for a place like Harvard, most of all for intellectual capacity building, interaction and interface between our universities and institutions of learning. The transformation that I have spoken of, two significant dimensions to that transformation, and inevitably I think if anyone was to be asked in an audience such as this, most people would pinpoint the Indian and American firms beginning to work together today to build nuclear plants using US nuclear technology, something that 20 years ago would have been unthinkable. But we're actually, sorry?
Can you speak up a bit?
Okay, we are actually working towards fulfillment of the aspirations that were reflected in the civil nuclear agreement between our two countries. In addition to this, we have our militaries rapidly developing a practice of regular bilateral exercises, to the extent that India's military forces carry out more exercises with the US military than any other partner country in the world. Again, this would have been thought as impossible only a few years ago. The second point in transformation that has been rapid and overdue is what looks today as a normal exercise for us, working together with the United States in something like 35 official dialogue mechanisms. And these have resulted in what we call a partnership that is all of government context and character. So much is happening, and it's happening so quickly that it seems inevitable that a lot more ambitious expectations will be pervasive in our cooperation. And that's where the dimensions of commerce come in. A lot is happening, and a lot more is expected, and a lot more is now being demanded. It's important that we keep in mind that when the ambitions are growing and the vision is high, not always being able to reach that level brings in a degree of disappointment. But that's a passing thing. It's not something that should be seen as a setback to what is indeed a blossoming important relationship. Let's put a little perspective on it that we need to recognize. We in India have more goods and services trade with American firms than with any other partners. We import more American cultural products than from anywhere else in the world, and our bilateral technology engagement is more intensive with the US than it is with any other country. Blue chip US firms keep their competitive edge as a result of their partnership with India's leading IT companies. They in turn earn global recognition, not to mention a significant portion of their profits on their balance sheets from US clients. A senior representative of a leading US aerospace firm told us just the other day that Indian IT firms have written over 3 million lines of code for one of their signature products, which is really, I think, a very neat piece of synergy. And these have all been purchased from Indian firms. Today, the bilateral investment flows, moving both ways, are impressive. Government estimates suggest that between the year 2002 and 2012, Indian firms have brought in as much as $5 billion, and US FDI stock amounted to $28 billion in India in the year 2012. Another barometer of our relationship that was given to us by a US colleague is that the US strategic trade export, so the export of products requiring specific licensing to India, has amounted to $5.8 billion in 2012. And of course, in the instantly symbolic sphere of security cooperation, our Air Force fleet today includes US-built heavy-lift aircraft like C-17, Globemaster, and the C-130J Super Hercules. Our Navy has taken possession of the state-of-art P-81 maritime reconnaissance aircraft, becoming the first Navy outside the US to do so. And our military is trained together, as I said, regularly and help evolve new military capabilities and tactics. Then our strategic and foreign policy establishments consult each other regularly on wide-ranging global energy markets and regional situations in East Asia, West Asia, Central Asia. We have dialogues, amongst the dialogues that I mentioned, ongoing on cybersecurity, counterterrorism, health and science technology, defense, and even in space, and the peaceful uses, of course, of nuclear energy. During the Prime Minister's summit with President Obama last week, we have just agreed to begin consultations on the Indian Ocean and a joint working group on climate change. All this, 15 years ago, would not have been possible even to imagine. Of course, what we have seen over the past 15 years have some issues that we need to tackle, and which is what we are doing. But at the same time, let us see some trend lines. What can we see of the future? I think a more prosperous future. Vice President Biden said that the bilateral trade that has grown 5 times in the last decade can be replicated as growth targets for the next decade. Business, investment, trade are not merely pillars of this partnership. They remain the key drivers of this modern bilateral relationship that we have. And we just need to ensure, I believe, on both sides, regulatory and standard setting role of government, which is the best used to frame the rules and road to ensure the flow of ideas between the state and business on both sides, to encourage business to engage productively on its own. And I believe that that's how the US model works to the best advantage. The energy partnership is again extremely important, and I think that when we think of India's traditional energy sources, including Iran, which is a matter of some concern to the United States, but we see some signals now perhaps of a thaw movement forward, and we wish the US well in its efforts. But energy, diversification of energy sources, again, would require much more traction between us and the US. Of course, finally, there is this India's demographic dividend that offers enormous opportunities in the field of education. It's both an obligation for us and an opportunity for our partners. And I believe that both in this as well as in healthcare, we can look at a revolution the way we had the first green revolution. We can look at the second green revolution as well. Important that two pluralistic societies like ours, India and US, we recognize the value of vigilance in the defense of our freedom, and therefore recognizing that the continuing threat that is posed to our open pluralistic societies by terrorism and radicalism is something that must have our paramount attention. And I recall here the painful incident in April this year in Boston, which is something, is a reminder to us, and a sad reminder that there is a strategic imperative of enhanced cooperation between countries like ours. I think for long we have lived in silos about the source of unwholesome attention given to our societies. It's now more than clear that that source is a source that is equally reprehensible for all of us. There is value, therefore, in our defense partnership that we hope to upgrade beyond purchase to identifying areas in which we can do co-development, co-production, and become truly partners. So how does this all grow further? I think the phrase that we are using now is the habit of consulting, that it is important that we engage in this habit of consulting, that we should think of connecting with each other multilaterally, globally, whenever there is an issue of special interest or concern to either of our countries, and which is of strategic importance to the globe. It would be unfair if I didn't mention, as I'd indicated, that there are some potholes that we need to avoid, or to ensure that we get them addressed and removed. There is suddenly, after a long period of optimism that began with our Herculean task of coming together on civil nuclear cooperation, there is suddenly a sense of negativity that one gets, particularly from business on both sides. There are specific reasons for this, irritants that particular sectors or companies may feel, but these are issues that can be addressed. And so long as we have a conviction and determination that we address these issues, policy choices and legislative measures sometimes have added to this cause a sense of alarm, but policy measures can be fixed. Sentiments do change, and as long as there is an overall sense of confidence in the intentions of both sides, I think long-term interests and opportunities will continue to inspire us to look beyond short-term difficulties that we might feel. And I think these difficulties were at least brought to the table by our leaders, by the President and our Prime Minister, and we do believe that there is a road ahead that can resolve many of these issues. Ladies and gentlemen, having outlined broadly the road ahead and suggested how to drive around a few potential pitfalls, let us now offer you some ideas for making a journey better and more rewarding. First, we can look at effective cooperation between us on terrorism, and I think that's critical, particularly in light of your experience in Afghanistan and elsewhere. There's strong public support in India for this dimension of our partnership. This is, of course, something where we need to talk seriously about engaging Pakistan and ensuring that Pakistan comes on board on this very, very critical and important dimension of world security. Secondly, the relationship between us must continue to be seen as standing entirely on its own merits. I think it took us a little while to get away from the hyphenated positions that the US foreign policy makers used, China, India, Pakistan, etc. And I think we've moved away from that. And we now have a robust and a merit-based relationship between two countries, looking at an enlightened self-interest. And this is something that we need to keep in mind and keep focus on. The future transformation of our strategic partnership needs to be based on strategic value that this partnership provides to both of us, and of course the fulfillment of the aspirations on either side. We have, as I said, an opportunity to make our defense cooperation stronger and to make it a true pillar of our relationship. We need to ensure that we move from defense towards, as I said, co-design, joint production, etc. The joint declaration on defense principles announced during the summit meeting between our Prime Minister and President Obama last week should provide a much higher level of strategic focus to our defense ties. Fourthly, let us recognize that trade and economic cooperation must be about more than finding fault with each other's policies. Both of us need significant investment in industry and manufacture and the jobs they create. We must find ways to work more closely together in this context. As India industrializes, the scope for beneficial cooperation will only increase. Our markets will become more attractive. Opportunities in research and development, technology agreements, integration of manufacturing processes, or trade are areas that could keep us busy for a very long time. Next, we can realize the latent potential for much more investment in each other's economies. We must not allow differences in trade in goods or in the movement of services to dominate our discourse. At the same time, we have to create fora to discuss these issues openly and with forward-looking approach. The energy and education are strategic openings for the US to invest in. As many of our American friends remind us, enabling the rise of India is or should be a strategic end in itself for the US. Like defense, these are sectors in which cooperation with the US actually helps expedite progress, beneficial for both sides. Finally, we are working very closely in many multilateral fora. We appreciate the support that US has provided for our membership to various multilateral export control regimes, the logical conclusion of the cooperation we have in civil nuclear area, and for a seat for India in the reformed UN Security Council. I think the episode of Syria, as indeed some other recent events in the UN, are a clear clarion call for need for reform on an urgent basis. It's important for both of us to continue to send positive signals to the world. If the US has indeed placed a strategic bet on India's rise, it makes little sense not to push back counter-narratives for those working to make you lose that bet. I think we get you to win the bet by working more closely together. It is essential that we continue to invest in our engagement at the highest levels, because this partnership really is our respective national interests being reflected in their true glory. The India-US partnership is actually all about making our people safer, more prosperous, and jointly work together to address challenges of an increasingly complex and troubled world. What could be more fundamental to the service of national interests than meeting these objectives? Therefore, it is in working towards addressing the strategic reality that our partnership will be defined in the decades ahead. Two democracies working together for development. Thank you for your attention.
So, Minister, thank you so much. You've given us a lot to think about, because you've given us a sense of the breadth of this relationship in all of its dimensions between the two governments. And I know the Minister is open to questions from our students on that. He's also, I think, open to questions about some of the regional issues that we talked about earlier today with faculty members. So let me ask our students just to raise their hands if they want to ask a question. I'd only ask you to mention your name to the Minister and what you're studying here, and then we'll go forward. Be sure that what you say has a question mark attached at the end of what you say. Yes, sir.
Good morning. My name is Brendan Stickles. I'm a mid-career student here at the Kennedy School and active duty military pilot. I can personally attest to the benefits of that cooperation, that military cooperation, and expediting the progress, as you said, with all the lessons we've learned communicating with the Defense Forces of India. Over the last year, I believe this summer, India launched and commissioned their first aircraft carrier. And in the previous year, China did. So while a year ago, only the US, UK, and France had the ability to operate aboard a carrier, now there's 5 countries. How do you think that translates to India's goals for foreign affairs, ambitions, and how do you foresee India using that unique capability? I believe in 2018 when it becomes operational.
Well, you know, we have, of course, historically been placed in a different context. U.S. has had assets across the globe to protect, strategic interests across the globe to protect, and therefore, your ability to deploy and strike at a short notice has been an important part of your strategic planning. We've just, in that sense, our mandate and our expectation is far more modest. We really had to protect our borders, and we had to protect our sea coast. We wanted, and we have been largely successful in preventing competition between different powers in the Indian Ocean to keep Indian Ocean as an area of peace. I think we've been largely successful in doing that. But there is from time to time a sense that there is an expansionist or an aggressive move by people who want, perhaps in order to reach out to more economic benefits, not necessarily to dominate for political reasons. And we need therefore a presence, and it's important that the growing economic clout of our country and the sense that we are an important emerging economy must have some corresponding capacity and capability to show in terms of prowess and military strength, not to use against anybody, but to ensure that there is an equilibrium and balance in the region. We don't subscribe to any view of containment of any neighbor, such as China, and that we have always made very clear, and I do believe China therefore has a comfort level with us. But there is constantly a view that the gap between China and India should not be so great that it makes our presence in the region unviable. But of course, we have our different strategies. They have their own strategies. We have our own priorities, and they have their priorities. We're happy to work with them together as well, and we do so. And the good thing is that we are able to work with many countries that are not on good terms with each other. And we do that with transparency, we do that with objectivity, and we do that in terms of an investment for a breakthrough sometimes in future. Today, for instance, if the moves that have been made by the US and Iran, these are very, very preliminary moves, but at least moves in the right direction to resolve a very, very serious issue in our region, which is the nuclear program that Iran is supposedly doing. Now, we are able to talk to the US and Iran, and throughout this crisis, all the period of disengagement between US and Iran, we continued to remain in communication with Iran. At the same time, on the critical vote on non-proliferation, we voted against Iran, and we didn't do it in a clandestine form. We didn't hedge in any bets, but we said to them very clearly that this is a principled position we take, and I think that gave us comfort on both sides, with the US and with Iran, and perhaps that can be put to good use. We think at Geneva II, for instance, we have the capacity and capability of helping with what has been really a remarkable and a very wholesome effort made by US and Russia together to find a solution to Syria that we are all extremely concerned about. But we are particularly concerned because we have more than 6 million expatriate Indians living in that region, and a spillover of hostility from Syria into that region would have a very adverse impact on the livelihoods of our own people. Therefore, both I think in principle and from the point of view of pragmatism, we make ourselves available to be able to help communications between those who might not otherwise be able to communicate. And right till now, I think we've done a good job of this, and we'd like to carry on being able to do that. The good guys around the block.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Disha, and I'm a junior at college. Professor Burns mentioned U.S. troop withdrawal in 2014 and how that's an arena in which the U.S. and India will have to cooperate. And also recently, as you mentioned, Prime Minister Singh met with Mr. Sharif. So what is it going to take for peace talks to commence again between India and Pakistan on the one hand? And on the other hand, as 2014 comes nearer, it seems unlikely that India and the US will be able to achieve sustainable stability in Afghanistan without Pakistan playing a role too. So what opportunities does that present in terms of new arenas of cooperation with Pakistan and the restart of peace talks?
Well, I think that's a very important question. If you want to talk to somebody and make sense and build upon a relationship, the first thing that you need to do is to stop insulting that person, and stop hurting that person, and stop spitting on that person, and not continue to test that person's patience. And I think this is what we have gently advised Pakistan, that it's important. Words will not do. Words are important. They started with some wonderful words, both during the campaign and after Prime Minister Sharif took over his office. We want to give him an opportunity. We trust what he is saying, but we do want to verify that the words mean something. And the recent incidents that have happened at the line of control and the border, and indeed also in Afghanistan, and the intelligence that is available to us indicates some forces that are obviously not acting in consistence with what he has said. And we know that he needs time, and we would like to give him time, but it's important that we see some things happen in the right direction. One is that they have to dismantle their infrastructure for terror. They have to dismantle it. Of course, they come back to us by saying we've lost 40,000 people, a general has been killed, a lieutenant colonel has been killed, but that's no comfort to our people. We are happy to collaborate and cooperate if they think that would help them bring down the acts of terrorist attacks on them. But ultimately, we are accountable to our people, and we must be able to say that, look, we've been able to control this. We have a difference on the border with China. We have no casualties on the Chinese border. We have disagreements. We have intrusions, but we don't have casualties. Well, in Pakistan, line of control, we have casualties all the time. And it's not enough to say, well, you killed 2 of our people as well. If there is hostility and there is violence, there will be casualties on both sides. We want that to end. And we believe that if they put their mind to it, they will be able to control the forces that are continuing to inflict pain upon India. And I think it's very important. We also wanted accountability for 26/11. And they have told us that they've appointed a new prosecutor, that they have cross-examined witnesses in India, the Judicial Commission that came to India, and therefore there will now be much more evidence available to give to their criminal courts. And if that happens, and that the proceedings in criminal court can go further and perhaps ensure that everybody who is responsible is made accountable, I think that would send a very good message to people who want peace on both sides. So that's very important. Now, of course, if we have a broad spectrum of agreement and comfort with Pakistan on our border, then perhaps we can expect something more conducive and constructive in Afghanistan as well. Right now, we are not quite sure that they have accepted our presence in Afghanistan. We are not there because we want to force ourselves on Afghanistan. We are there because all the stakeholders believe India has an important role and that India must be there. Most of all, Afghanistan is very keen that India be there. And we are there as major partners in development. We have important projects that we will complete by 2014, including the Parliament House building, the Salma Dam, and various other grid connectivity and road connectivity. We will do that. We will continue our commitment to Afghanistan because we don't have an exit policy, but not at the cost of Afghanistan itself. I mean, if our engagement with Afghanistan is a problem, then we don't want to be a problem. But we cannot submit to someone else's view that Afghanistan should not deal with India. We don't even tell Afghanistan not to deal with the Taliban. We're not happy with Taliban, but as long as it's Afghanistan-led, controlled, and Afghanistan-owned, we have no problem. If they think there is a solution through inclusion of Taliban, we have no problem. But caution, of course, them against possibilities. But we are there. We are committed to Afghanistan. We will remain there. And I think in this US-India convergence of what should be the roadmap beyond 2014 is considerable, and we would like to strengthen it.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Good morning, Minister Khurshid. My name is Rajat Sethi. I'm from Kanpur, Uttar Pradesh, from India. So I had a specific question on the style of negotiations that the India and US has been having over the past couple of years. Specifically talking about the dilution of the nuclear deal and and its impact on some of the interest groups within India, and even on the surveillance issues that the US NSA has had on India. And your August office has categorically called the snooping efforts as cyber scrutiny. And don't you think this is kind of a dilution of our negotiation tactics and style with the US? And what do you, what is your viewpoint in the short term and in the long term about this strategy?
Do you mean, presumably by using the word dilution, you mean that we are being more accommodative and submissive to their point of view?
Diluting the accountability of the companies.
Let me just make it very, very clear that what I said about what was reported in the newspapers was to repeat what Secretary Kerry had explained to me, and that was about metadata. Now, of course, beyond metadata, there may be other issues of surveillance or other issues of interception, which was not the issue at that time. The issue at that time was only about metadata, and I explained the procedure by which, although it's a very special legislation, there are special procedures, in-camera hearings, etc., but there is accountability to courts, independent courts. And a collection of metadata was not actually snooping and interfering with anybody's personal communications. That is what I said. But people either deliberately didn't want to understand that, or perhaps knew something that Secretary Kerry and I didn't know. And so they jumped and said, "Oh, you're compromising." We have a joint working group on cybersecurity, and these are issues that joint working group can handle and will handle, and is handling. I think that there wasn't a need for alarm at that point. There was a purpose and intent that the US government has. A lot of that has to do with ensuring that they can prevent terrorist attacks taking place, and of course there is information that many terrorist attacks have been prevented. The trouble with terrorist attacks is that you really get to know in the public only of the attacks that get through, and not of the attacks that have been prevented. And therefore you think, for one attack, so much surveillance doesn't make any sense. But we have a joint working group, and we're working on this. These are their concerns, our concerns. Both of us will have free and frank discussions, and the right thing by both countries is what would be done. It doesn't help to raise an unnecessary alarm, and by not participating in the alarm, you don't dilute your position. You perhaps reaffirm and confirm your position by not screaming and shouting, but ensuring that you have all the information that you would put across to your partner country and talk about it. There are things that need to be talked about in confidence. India, we are living through an age where people think the word confidence should be removed from the dictionary, that everything must be done out in the open, and that the media must have knowledge of what you intend to say long before you say it. And if you just want them to wait till you've said it, they think that is a violation of freedom of speech and so on. We have to be careful about things of this nature. At an appropriate stage, we will share it with the media. There is no problem, and we don't complain if they go and get it themselves without our telling them. We don't hold it against them. We just smile and carry on doing our work.
So you also raised the issue of liability and the nuclear.
Okay, as far as the nuclear liability issues and other issues are concerned, we have engaged with US firms. This is nothing between the US government and the Indian government. We believe, through legislation, reflected the agreement that we had with the US government. The terms of that legislation have to be understood by commercial people and lawyers on both sides. NCPIL and Westinghouse and also other firms are in touch. Their lawyers are talking about the implications of both the wording of the legislation and the regulations that we put in place. We believe that their concerns are addressed, their liability concerns are addressed. We believe that. We don't think that more needs to be done. And in any case, to do more means getting much broader consensus than the consensus that we were with great difficulty able to reach in Parliament. My considered view and very clear statement is that we are not diluting anything. We don't need to dilute anything. There is sufficient flexibility or enough space available to address concerns, commercial concerns on both sides. We have now agreed on the early works agreement. We will now from there move on to the main body of agreement. And I think that people who are skeptics are difficult to satisfy. But I think most reasonable, sensible people will accept that this is a win-win situation for both countries.
We have time just for really 1.5 questions. So I'm going to ask you in the back to ask a question, and then maybe Professor Hanna to add. We'll ask both questions together, Minister, then you can reply to them both.
Sure.
Please.
You mentioned collaboration on intellectual collaboration on both fronts. I was wondering if that included the Indian government being open to suggestions from experts at top universities here in order to better policy implementation and policy.
Yes, I think there's been a fairly dramatic shift now. We are engaging with consultants, we are engaging with thinkers, we are engaging with university people. We are receiving a lot of ideas. There's a lot of exchange, even at the level of the Planning Commission. There's a lot of exchange, consultation, participation, and we welcome. We welcome, and we do think that the United States of America is a repository of enormous intellectual capacity, and we would be very willing. We send our civil servants for training to the U.S. We have other people coming from different walks of life. Our think tanks are in much closer collaboration and in touch with each other. A lot of important American think tanks have now established chapters in our country. Aspen, for instance, has established a chapter in our country. And I think that the flavor of how independent ideas get filtered into government decision making is being followed now, I think, in a growing manner in our country, and to great advantage. And we also have forums like the CEO forums, which will bring commercial ideas together. And in fact, we hope that many of the commercial issues will get resolved amongst them, and the governments will then only need to implement what is a consensus arrived at between people who know the ground situation better than the government does.
Thank you. Maybe both professors, if you just want to say quick questions together, and then...
Yeah.
Let me go first, since it connects to the comment that you made at the beginning, Mr. Khurshid, about universities in both countries also. Just as a concrete example, one of the things that the South Asian Institute has been doing at Harvard is connecting different universities in this area, particularly MIT and Harvard, to take scientists to India, to work with younger scientists there and bring some of the knowledge from here there and get some reverse flow of thinking. And that has been supported also by the government of India, amongst other things. So our hope is that we would be able to scale that up quite considerably. But I think that working with technologies from here that solve common social problems, social and economic problems, not just in India, but in Pakistan, Afghanistan, places like that, is one thing that I think creates the bedrock on which your various foreign policy initiatives can work very smoothly. So we're very optimistic about pursuing that. Thank you for the government support.
Good. You don't have a question mark at the end, so I don't have to.
Would you like to support?
Don't have to answer that. Yeah. Would you like support? Yes. I think this is a very attractive thought. We are, in any case, we are working around, because we couldn't get the legislation passed which allows American universities to come. We are now finding an alternative route. The government has decided that by the executive route we will allow standalone university campuses and university projects to be done in our country, and I think that's a wonderful thing for both of us.
Good. Mr. Khurshid, thank you very much for being
you.
with us at Harvard. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.